Hello and welcome to the LLG vlog. I'm Deborah Evans, Chief Executive of LLG, and today I'm being joined by Ed Hammond, who is the Assistant CEO of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Deborah.
Now, I mentioned in the podcast earlier this week that the Centre are piloting a development programme aimed at enhancing dialogue and coordination between chairs of scrutiny committees and chairs of audit committees. Now, this is interesting work, Ed, because we know that people just do not get the scrutiny function and the role it plays. And we also know that audit is in crisis. Indeed, the LGA are concerned about the lack of timely audits, amongst other concerns that they may have. Now, people can often confuse audit and scrutiny as well. So it might be really helpful, Ed, before we go any further, if you could just quickly explain what the difference is for audit and scrutiny.
Certainly, I can try at least. So the audit function in local authorities is focused on ensuring that the systems and controls in place around financial management and also things like risk management are effective and efficient in operation. So there are a number of regulatory duties placed on audit committees, principally by some quite detailed guidance issued by CIPFA, which explains the variety of things that audit has to do in overseeing, for example, internal audit activity, acting as the liaison with the external audit function, and doing things like signing off the annual governance statement. But the audit committee is one of those member functions of the authority that's often seen as quite technical in nature, but actually, certainly with regard to its grip on finance, its grip on risk, actually it plays quite a fundamental role in the governance framework. Scrutiny, on the other hand, is looking at the substantive outcome and effect of policy. So while audit is there looking at the mechanics and the systems and the processes that underpin the council operations, scrutiny is really meant to be looking at the outcome of that activity. So you're looking at the policy priorities that the council is taking. You're looking at the different options available, the needs of local people, and you're developing recommendations, I suppose, for what the future for those things should be. So obviously between those two things, there is a lot of read across, particularly we think in the space of financial oversight and risk oversight, and the work we're doing, this pilot development work, sort of bringing together scrutiny and audit chairs, is basically designed to focus on those two key areas in understanding what the links and areas of collaboration might be.
And indeed, both are therefore essential for good governance. Goes without saying, doesn't it,
Yeah.
really? So tell me a little bit about the impetus for the centre and indeed yourself to pilot this new programme then.
So this really has come up. I mean, over the course of the last few years, we've been, as you know, we provide support to councils going in and reviewing and suggesting improvements to various parts of their governance arrangements. A lot of the work that we do relates to the operation of councils' overview and scrutiny arrangements, but we also do wider reviews of governance. And arising out of that, we've highlighted in a number of pieces of work that we've done with councils a sort of missed opportunities around joined up oversight of the financial space and also of the member grip on risk, which we think some quite proportionate work around drawing together audit scrutiny chairs would help to resolve. Really, is looking at where is there a gap, but what is there that we could do that would actually make a significant impact without investing a huge amount of resource, and we thought this was a way of doing it. The work's ultimately funded by government through our arrangement with the LGA, and basically as you said, it's a pilot exercise, so it's a kind of proof of concept type thing where we're bringing together a relatively small number of chairs in a couple of different cohorts to kind of work through these issues, and depending on the success, we're going to see if we can roll it out to the wider sector next year.
And I think a focus on risk is really important in the current environment, particularly with the ongoing underfunding crisis, etc. That the risks are growing, and to have that risk-based focus could be really useful. So what will the programme focus on then?
So firstly, it's going to be about ensuring that audit and scrutiny chairs respectively have a clear sense about what the duties are of the other function. So it's starting off with, what is the role of audit? What is the role of scrutiny? What is the member role in those two spaces? What is it that you should be doing? Comparing and contrasting experiences and understanding where people are coming from. Because really, we wanted to speak to, existing scrutiny chairs, existing audit chairs, people who already have experience in this space, understanding what those experiences are, and then using that to chart a way forward. So it's taking that understanding, it's then seeing what are the areas of cut across, where are the areas where there are opportunities for collaboration, and then getting chairs to commit then to the practical steps that they personally can undertake in order to bring about that change. And one of the things that we've done is part of the sign up process for the exercise is getting formal agreement from the MO or the Section 151 in the authority concerned to say, when my members come back with ideas about what needs to be done in order to improve things, I will work with them to embed those changes. That was an important part to us to make sure that there's a follow through on the commitments made over the course of the development.
So from the point of view of outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, is this all about then a list of commitments and then actually piloting those commitments in practice to see what will work? And is there an aim to then produce some guidance around things that you've then proved have worked from a commitments perspective? Or is that going to be very local authority specific? How do you feel it's going to work?
Well, I think it is going to be quite local authority specific. I mean, we, over the course of the last few years, have produced a couple of national guidance documents about the connection between audit and scrutiny. Only earlier this year, we produced something that looked in more detail at the connection between audit and scrutiny and the risk management framework. But we think that the solutions are going to be distinct to each individual authority, and we want people to develop and define their own personal commitments to change rather than saying these are the things which you ought to be doing. The idea will be that in the new year we will pull together a publication which will reflect on those commitments and say this is what the outcome of this exercise has been. It will at that point be too early to say has this stuff worked, but we are also developing an evaluation framework for the work which we will use next year to further consider in those councils participating. To what extent has this actually made a difference? To what extent has this led to change and improved practices?
Well, I think some sort of framework or process for other councils to then follow through would be a really great outcome. And it seems to fit quite well with the code of practice that we've done for the Golden Triangle on good governance, because it's going to be managing risk, managing assurance, looking for areas of improvement, etc. And I do like that idea that the MO then has to commit to sort of take these actions forward and presumably take them back then and have wider discussions about how operationally that they can be delivered, really. So that positive improvement and continuous sort of innovation that could come from these sort of deep dives would be really, really helpful. And at the end of the day is the whole point of audit. It's that deep dive that then shows where things can be done better, where there might be gaps, etc. And I know some people sometimes have a perception of audit being negative, but actually it's there for all the right reasons. Same with scrutiny. Good challenge is a really positive thing. This is something to be embraced, not to be concerned about. Do you think there needs to be more education in the sector around the functions of scrutiny and audit?
Yes, I mean, of course. I mean, I think education amongst members, education amongst officers as well. I think there is always more we can do to ensure that the roles are understood. I think one of my concerns has tended to be around the sort of capability and awareness of people at middle management level in the officer sort of cohorts, sort of tier 3, tier 4 people, about the role of members, but the role of members in these regulatory spaces, particularly because I think there is not the greatest understanding amongst our mid-ranking colleagues sometimes about these kinds of things. We people working in the legal and governance space can make assumptions that others are similarly aware of these things. But when we go around from council to council, we increasingly find ourselves in the sort of extended corporate leadership team kind of space, having conversations with these people. And I've been quite surprised and slightly worried sometimes at the lack of knowledge. People get promoted into relatively senior roles having had quite limited contact with members and member spaces. So I think that's definitely a priority. And I think on the member side as well, I think there's a need for a deepening of I think attitudes towards learning and development for members as well. So one of the wider things that we're doing is thinking much more fundamentally about member development. We do quite a lot of member training, but it's quite traditional in tone and nature. And we're thinking about, well, is the way that councils think about learning and development for members, is it designed in a way that embeds that learning and understanding of things, or are we rather focused on, the in and out, kind of do some chalk and talk training and sort of go away in a way that doesn't really develop and extend members' knowledge? So that's another aspect of the work that it's a whole other thing that we're thinking about at the moment.
Well, that sounds really, really positive, actually. And actually, some of that, those cultural issues that you described there about traditional approaches to training are reflected in other areas within local authorities, and sometimes a little bit of a step back and a rethink about how we do things and why we do things, and whether what we've been doing for the past 20 years is still the right way to do it is a really good thing to do. Um, Now let's talk about backlogs. So I mentioned earlier that the LGA have some concerns that the audit backlog is unlikely to be addressed until 2028. So how damaging is that for local audit and authorities?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying it's pretty dreadful. It sort of does beg the question about what's the point of the sort of audit exercise, when delays are going to be so significant, to sort of take a further 4 or 5 years to kind of do that. I mean, it's not surprising in a way, because we knew that things were in a fairly parlous state, but it's depressing. I think it highlights that very little action has been taken either on the outcome of the Redmond review, which let's not forget was nearly 5 years ago, sort of and also on the the exercise that the various different exercises that select committees have undertaken to look at local audits. I think, as we said in when we gave oral evidence to the Community Local Government Select Committee back in the spring, there is an opportunity to think about a different national framework for managing and undertaking local audit now, because it's clear that the current system's failed. I think we need to think about the role of Oflog as the systems leader for local audit, reflecting and echoing what Redmond had to say about the need for a sector body to lead and direct on this stuff. I I don't know much about what government might be planning in this space. I know that the work is ongoing about redefining and developing the role of and remit of Oflog, and it'd be interesting and productive if that developed into that systems leader role, because as we know, the new ARGA body, which is being established to manage audit within the whole kind of corporate sector, is continuing to be delayed and set up, and will have a very, very wide remit, a remit I would argue too wide to allow for a forensic focus on local government. So I think we're in a difficult position where there's no obvious public policy direction that's going to take us out of the situation. We're it's about dragging through the backlog without addressing the systemic problems that have led to the backlog existing in the first place. So I'm looking with concern and a degree of hopeful eagerness to see if government's going to act on this in the next parliamentary session.
Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because the last government had plans to make audit committees compulsory within local authorities. They planned it, but they never actually made that happen. Although obviously combined authorities do have audit committees. But do you think there'd be any merit in potentially removing other authorities that are currently exempt from needing audit committees, such as parish councils?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are sort of two things here. I think the thing about having the kind of structure in place is really, really important. I think there's a logic in, when you have a body that is specifically focused on these kinds of things, it focuses the minds, it focuses efforts on making sure those regulatory duties are performed effectively. But there is inevitably something here about culture as well. Failures happen in organisations that have audit committees just as much as they do in organisations that don't. So if there is going to be a step to enhance the role of committees and extend their mandatory nature to other bodies, I think that's got to be accompanied by work there and in other spaces to say, why is this stuff important? Why is good financial management and control important? I think, and that's as much a need in big professional organizations as it is in smaller ones, frankly.
Well, I think you're right, because otherwise it just becomes a box ticking exercise. You've got to understand the why before you just get on and do it, really, don't you? So that makes that make great sense. Additionally, just thinking back to previous government announcements, there was a view that political party whipping was incompatible with overview and scrutiny. But then obviously along came the Localism Act, and in 2019, the government then gave guidance which made it clear that, I quote, all members and officers should consider the role of scrutiny committee plays to be that of a critical friend, not a de facto opposition. So the long and the short of it is, do you think this happens in practice?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the difficulty is with scrutiny is that everything that scrutiny looks at is going to be political, because politics is about choices and it's about options, it's about focus and prioritization. So everything that scrutiny looks at is going to, well, should have a political dynamic to it. The question is how members manage that dynamic and how we as officers support them to manage that dynamic as well. There's no easy way through, because you can ban whipping. It's happened in Wales. In Wales, you're not allowed to whip at scrutiny. But of course, there's whipping and there's whipping, isn't there? So there's the formal whip where you say, you must vote in this particular way. But equally, when you're a member of a political group, you can feel a degree of informal pressure. And that might not be pressure that's exerted on you by anybody else, but you can feel pressure to be loyal, to say or not say certain things in certain contexts and certain environments. So it's much more difficult than saying, having a rule saying, you can't do this, because it's about human relationships and the personalities and characters of the people involved. It's why we say when we talk about what makes for good scrutiny, it should be sort of led by independent-minded people. And I think there's something about going into scrutiny with an independent mind, not saying I'm not a politician anymore, I'm leaving my political hat at the door, because you can't do that, because as a member, you're bringing your political insight to bear on policy making, and scrutiny is a really, really important part of the role. But it's about members understanding, what role does my party political affiliation, if I have one, play into, what impact does that have on the work that I do here? And it's about encouraging members, I think, to take a step back and think, how am I engaging with this topic, with this issue? Where is it appropriate for me to lean a little bit more into the political back and forth than it might be otherwise? And there will be times when scrutiny provides a kind of flashpoint for political ding-dongs, and you think about call-in activities, you talk about scrutiny or particularly contentious or high-profile issues where these things will bubble up under the surface. There's an inevitability about that, and that's kind of fine. I think we have to provide the flexibility to ensure that happens. If those kind of behaviours dominate scrutiny, and if scrutiny is just about that political slanging, that obviously it doesn't work well. There is a job on MOs and statutory scrutiny officers in those authorities where they exist to sort of keep an active eye on those relationships, those behaviours, those cultures, just to make sure that things are going well, and also to make sure that chairs are supported to stamp down on behaviour where it does, start looking inappropriate, and to remind members about appropriate conduct. But it's really difficult, and it depends much more on, as I've said, on the culture of the individual authority and the willingness of members and officers to work together to ensure that, political behaviour is balanced.
And it also is dependent on the soft skills of people such as the monitoring officer, who need to manage this and make it work. So tell me a little bit about the sort of guidance that you're able to offer. I do appreciate there was a report recently in September in the House of Commons Library, beautifully entitled Overview and Scrutiny in Local Government, but it did refer to your guidance. So what have you got to offer, Ed?
So we at the moment are sort of refreshing our sort of core practical guidance on overview and scrutiny. And over the course of the coming months, we've just started putting a series of new practice guides on our website. Over the course of the next few months, going into the new year, we're going to be sort of augmenting that material. The idea being that at the end of the financial year, there will be a fairly comprehensive series of information covering all aspects of overview and scrutiny. that will be a replacement to our existing Good Scrutiny Guide, which is still available to download. But every 5 years or so, we undertake one of these kind of big fundamental revisions of all the core guidance that we've got. If you go on our website, which is new, we have a new website, you'll be able to see it all on there. We are reviewing both the content and the presentation of that material. So we've published just under half of it so far. We're inviting people to come back to it and say, does it work for you? You know, does this meeting your needs? Too much detail, too little detail? Any areas where, you know, you think need to be sort of refreshed, with the idea that we'll have the finished stuff up there early in the new year. There is, of course, existing technical guidance that continues to be available on the website. We've got a lot of stuff on things like access to information, work programming, operation of call-in, the approaches that councils can take to review their constitutions, sort of range of sort of more technical subjects that we've covered over the course of the last few years. And obviously, if people have got specific questions, or if they think that we might have written something on some area connected with governance in the last few years but can't quite find it, then you can obviously contact us directly, and we will be able to direct you to something, because we will have written something about it at some point in the last few years.
Thank you. You know our members well, Ed. So I can't wrap up today without just mentioning the fact that we're having a second opportunity to join our constitutional clinic, which members can book to attend on the 8th of November via our events page. And obviously Ed will be joining us on that. And once we've got the information and evidence obtained from that meeting, we'll be looking at next steps. So just Ed, final word from you then. What do you see the next steps on the constitutional clinic work to be that will provide something useful for the sector?
Well, this is happening at a particular sort of optimal time, really, because we're just starting our negotiation, our conversation with the LGA about our delivery contract for next year. So the conversations we have and have had at the Constitution Clinic earlier in the summer will feed directly into that exercise and understanding what it is that is a priority for the sector, what we need to do around governance and scrutiny, where action might need to be taken. It also helps us to understand how we can support individual councils better. So obviously I mentioned that we were going and providing, you know, we do deliver consultancy support for individual councils on governance and the constitution. It augments our approach to that, and it augments the approach that we're providing support to people sort of on a sort of regional basis as well. So we support kind of regional scrutiny networks, which bring together officers and members. We do training support for those networks, and some of the outcomes of the clinics have been used previously directly to feed into the training and support that we provide to those, and that will obviously continue. So there are practical mechanisms by which we're doing that. We're also trying to spin up a sort of more sort of purposeful approach to doing research as well. So getting external funding for carrying out research. So where there are issues which arise from constitution clinics where we think, you know, we might want to investigate that further, see if that's a systemic issue for the sector, provide some advice, provide some guidance. That's something which we would probably hope to take forward as well, but that's a little bit more long term.
Well, at LLG, we're really interested in ensuring that people have ideas about how they make their constitution fit for purpose, easy to access, accessible, etc. So that's sort of the side of things that we'll be focusing on. But I have to say, Ed, it's been a delight talking to you. It's a pleasure as ever to have you on our vlog. And hopefully we look forward to seeing you at our governance conference on December the 13th.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And it's goodbye from me. And it's goodbye from Ed.
Bye-bye.